7 miles from the city of Jerusalem was the small town of Emmaus. It's on the road there that we hear a remarkable story about God, about his heart and about hope. 3 days after Jesus was executed at Calvary, just outside the walls of Jerusalem, 2 of his disciples were heading out of town. Although not part of the 12, for 3 years they followed Jesus and became increasingly convinced he was the Messiah. After all, Jesus had a compelling ministry of power and grace. He commanded the storm to stop, and it did. He cleansed people with leprosy. He healed the blind and the deaf. He confronted the religious hypocrisy of his day. His teaching brought illumination and insight to the scriptures and made God's kingdom seem near. And then things went terribly wrong. The man they had set their hopes on died, not just a normal death, but a defeat at the hands of their oppressors, the Romans. Imagine how they felt. They'd followed Jesus for 3 years, and now, on the road to Emmaus, they were replaying everything that had happened. Slowly but surely, cynicism entered their hearts. God had forgotten them. He was absent, distant, and they were walking away. Welcome to the Thursday cross-reference episode of the Selah Time to Pause podcast from Plexus Salvation Army, an online church in the UK. On Monday, we thought about the faithfulness of God and how, unlike the seeming pleasures of the world, he does not under-deliver on his promises. But does it always feel that way? When life teems with brokenness, poverty, disappointment, greed, divorce and pain, Christians, as frequently as anyone else, seem to struggle to figure out how to live with hope. How do we maintain faith in a God who writes poetic promises in the scriptures, yet leaves the threads of our own stories frayed and ragged at the edges?
I will stop and breathe in your presence. Just breathe. Just breathe.
There's a little section in the scriptures that in many ways articulates the time of history in which we live. It shows how God responds to those wrestling with hopelessness and cynicism. It's found in the last few chapters of the Gospels and celebrated in the traditional church calendar as the season of Eastertide, the 50-day period between Jesus' resurrection and Pentecost Sunday, where Jesus has just a few short days to lay the foundations of his church before he returns to his Father. Pause for a moment and ask yourself this question. If you were the resurrected Son of God who had just overcome death and hell, how would you spend those 50 days? If you had a resurrected body, how would you use it to establish your reign before ascending to the right hand of the Father? Perhaps Jesus should have gone to Rome, fought in the Colosseum, worked his way up to a face-to-face showdown with Caesar, gladiator style, and won the masses with his power and might. Or maybe Jesus should have confronted the Jewish leaders who crucified him, dismantled their corrupt system, set up his headquarters in Jerusalem and ushered in the kingdom of God. That's what we would have done. But that's not what Jesus did. And what he did do during his last 40 days reveals something amazing about the heart of God. He doesn't build his movement on the praise of the crowds, the wisdom of the scholars, the might of the army, or access to the cultural elites. Jesus spends his time finding his followers who are lost in the fallout between his death and resurrection, and he goes about lovingly, convincingly restoring their hope. The book of Acts puts it like this.
After his suffering, he showed himself to these men and gave many convincing proofs that he was alive. He appeared to them over a period of 40 days and spoke about the kingdom of God.
He appeared, showed, convinced, and spoke about the kingdom of God. Apparently, this is what Jesus did to lay a foundation for the church that would last thousands of years. He made sure that those who had got lost along the way understood their place in the story that God was telling. Today's story takes place on one of the small, dusty roads that makes its way out of Jerusalem. Despite the rumours of Jesus' resurrection, 2 of his followers, disappointed in the kind of Messiah he turned out to be, were leaving the city. It seems that in spite of their connection to the 12 disciples, their proximity to Jesus, and even rumours that he was back from the dead, they had abandoned hope and were headed away. And then, as they were leaving Jerusalem and leaving the movement of Jesus, Jesus came himself and walked with them. Now that's a revelation of God's heart. Jesus walking with the disillusioned even as they are walking away from him.
"What are you discussing together as you walk along?" Jesus asked. They stood still, their faces downcast. One of them, named Cleopas, asked him, "Are you only a visitor to Jerusalem, and do you not know the things that have happened there in these days?" "What things?" he asked. "About Jesus of Nazareth," they replied. "He was a prophet, powerful in word and deed before God and all the people. The chief priests and our rulers handed him over to be sentenced to death, and they crucified him. But we had hoped that he was the one who was going to redeem Israel."
But we had hoped. In those few short words, in our hearts we hear the pain and disappointment of many. They had hoped that Jesus was the Messiah, that he would redeem Israel, that God's kingdom would be fully manifest, and so would their hopes. But it didn't turn out this way. Those two disciples that we meet on the road were likely there at the foot of the cross, watching Jesus' defeat at the hands of the Romans. Crucifixion was a political punishment, a graphic and forcible reminder that Rome had won and you had lost. And here was their failed Messiah hanging on a cross, along with the hopes of a young Jewish couple looking for a revolution. And so after that couple, on the road to Emmaus, pleaded with Jesus to have dinner with them, something beautiful happened. Jesus revealed his true identity when he broke bread with them, one of the most intimate moments friends could share in the ancient Middle East. Jesus ultimately gave his followers more than just the gift of restored hope and a recovered story. He gave them himself. Ultimately, it's an encounter with Jesus that will restore hope and prove to us that he is faithful in his promises and that he will not underdeliver. And the resurrected Jesus is still on the road, finding those who have been lost along the way. I'm convinced that one of the reasons Jesus didn't confront the might of Rome or challenge the religious powers in Jerusalem was because he knew the story we long to hear is not one of military victory or political control, but rather the story we want to hear is the story of a faithful God who restores the lost and offers hope.
Light in the darkness, my God, that is who you are. And you are waymaker, miracle worker, promise keeper. Light in the darkness.